The fifth schedule was that during British time, there was total resistance to the British happened only from tribal communities, Central Indian tribal tracts and Northeastern tribal tracts. So then finally, not being able to manage this kind of conflict with the state, the British in 1865 passed a law in which they divided the tribal tracts into two. Areas that are totally excluded for the purposes of the administration and areas that are partially excluded for the purposes of the administration. So totally exclusion was the Northeast. So their own traditional institutions were able to strengthen and found. Partially excluded was Central Indian tracts. And so therefore they were called totally excluded areas and partially excluded areas. We are all under the partially excluded area configuration, and that was put under the fifth schedule, and totally excluded areas was under the sixth schedule. So since they had no intervention by the British government, they were able to develop and strengthen their governing institutions. Yes. Here it was the British government, so the governing institutions that built up were actually institutions of resistance. And the fact that we were forced to live so many years, that a culture of resistance developed, which didn't lead to a culture of reconstruction. Okay. Now one is trying to do it with PESA. We try to build this into PESA, where communities begin conserving themselves and governing themselves. With limited results, because there's too much of a disruption of traditional culture that has taken place in the interim period from 1945 to 1975, 18, on that whole period, or even up to 2000. So rebuilding that is our biggest challenge. And how do we take control of our education? How do we communities take control of their education? Communities take control of their health. They have taken control of their health. They monitor every health institution in the area, including the public health service and the hospital.
No, can you explain about the issue?
Which issue? Which issue that you are talking of? The forest issue. See, the forest issue in our area was quite clear. That in 1850 the British took away these territories, and so therefore the Adivasis of the area began to understand that a new form of resistance has to be built. The resistance is we have to move from freedom from the British takeover of our forests to freedom for, in terms of being able to build our own. Yes. So for us the issue is actually building up that freedom for. In many areas, large number of areas, in fact we would be like one drop in the ocean. But one tries to build up this process in Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat and things like that, and for which we collectively formed this campaign for survival and dignity. Because the forest is not limited to survival, it's limited to survival to all human beings, but for us as tribals and as forest people, it has to be part of dignity. So taking back the forest, every community, that is the main issue for us, doing both. Today the state realizes that it cannot protect the forest. So they had started the joint forest management and things like that, etc. But joint forest management, you are not there to manage the forest. It's not your property to manage. So we have opposed joint forest management. We are saying community forest care. We are going to care for a resource that does not belong to us. It has been given to us from our elders to hand over to the new generation. Now, to develop that consciousness will take its own time, in the sense that when I am just now narrating, there will be small pockets where you will have this kind of consciousness to a proper degree. So, it sustains their culture. But there are many areas which this kind of consciousness has not been built. So, for us, it's a consciousness of building up the forest and say, the forest is ours. And the forest is not just our source of physical survival, it's also the source of our cultural survival. Breaking through these bonds, because till now forest has been reduced to private property of the state. And the construct of property is a very, very complex concept to be able to reduce it to community owning, not owning in that sense as property, but community belonging. You care for the forest because you belong to the forest, not because you own the forest. This is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing nationally. Now, on the 3rd and 4th of July, we will meet in Delhi again to discuss and debate this issue, because all the organizations that are part of the campaign for survival and dignity, most of them have been able to resolve their kabja issues, means that their occupation has been recognized. But to move out from that, because in that you are reducing forest into forest land into a material commodity. But the forest is not a material commodity. The forest for many communities is a spiritual reality, for others it's a cultural reality, for others it's a survival strategy. So therefore we have to move away from this concept of property, because we don't own the forest owns us. Organizing this transition is the biggest challenge that we face today. What does the law say? The law talks of one of the rights in the 26 different rights which are there mentioned in the law, is the right to intellectual property of the forest, which is probably the most critical right. It's also the right which is greatest amount at risk, because we have only one case we have really where there has been some negotiation with the intellectual property concept of the forest with the state, that is of the Kani people in Kerala, to understanding ownership in as belonging and not as owning. So with the Kani people, they have entered into a contract in terms of intellectual property. For us today, that intellectual property goes across many. We are envisaging is to move into this new phase of moving away from ownership to beginning to see ourselves as stewards of the forest and not owners of the forest. Because this concept of stewardship has not been built in our cultural understanding, both in understanding by the state and by the non-state. When I mean the non-state, I mean the whole NGO world, which are quasi-state. That concept of what is the concept of ownership has not been really clarified. This will be our biggest challenge. That there is a concept, we are not talking of a concept of ownership, we are talking of a concept of stewardship, where stewardship built in with rights. This is the biggest challenge, because it's the whole construct of the constitution is also around rights to property, and all the other rights that we have are also properties that inheres in me, or property that inheres in the state or in the community, etc. It's not seen outside that, and this has become the consciousness of the people. So conservation is part of that consciousness, and we have to move away from it, from conservation to the recognition that the forest has its right to survive of its own.